Welcome, everybody, to another installation of the Inspired Teachers podcast. Today, I'm interviewing my old friend, student, my brother in arms, Martin Ebelhardt, which we're going to call him Marty, because that's how I know him. Marty's had an amazing career in law enforcement. He's got a vast experience in martial arts, and I think we're going to have a great conversation. So, Marty, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's good to be here.
As I like to ask everybody, like if you could tell my audience, like how did we meet, like and when,
Yeah,
how long have I known you, and things like that.
yeah. So that would have been 2000, late 2004, if memory serves. It's been a while.
20 years.
20 years. Yeah.
Wow.
And well, we met. I had been practicing martial arts for most of my life. I sustained a knee injury. It's a pretty significant knee injury, and was essentially told by my surgeon that I really shouldn't and probably couldn't do the kind of stuff that I had been doing previously. I was told not to run, and basically what doctors tell you is just, stay off it, don't do anything, find another way of life. And I've been referred to a surgeon down at the Mayo Clinic. I went down there after I had an initial surgery, and they wanted to do this more invasive surgery. So I researched a little bit and found out that it really didn't offer any necessarily a better chance at healing, and started to kind of look into things on my own, do some research, and part of that led me to Chinese medicine. I was going to a acupuncturist who's also MD from China, in Edina. And when I walked in, there was a Tai Chi sword hanging on the wall. And so she started treating me, and we got to talking, and I told her that how I hurt myself, and I was a martial artist. And she said, "Oh, I've treated a lot of martial artists and all that," and kind of dispelled what I'd been told by the surgeon as far as my knee healing potential. And she said, "Well, Western medicine will tell you that cartilage doesn't heal because it doesn't have a blood flow, but it has an energy flow, it has a chi flow, and there's other things that affect that. And basically your cartilage has a lot of the same stuff that your fingernails have in it." So she says, "I can't promise you that, that your cartilage is going to grow back. I don't know, but I can tell you that healing is possible." So she started doing acupuncture, and she said, "See if you can find a good Tai Chi teacher." And so, we didn't have technology yet back then, so I couldn't Google it. So I pulled out the Yellow Pages.
Yellow Pages.
And I started looking for Tai Chi. And I said, "Twin Cities Tai Chi." All right, I'm there. I went there, came in, and that's how it started. Yeah, that's how it started. And the rest is history, I guess, as they say.
Do you know that I came to Tai Chi from a knee injury?
I didn't know that.
I don't usually tell people the
No.
full story, but same thing.
Yeah.
I had a knee injury. I was really testing. I was getting ready for a test for my black belt.
Yeah.
And the more I trained, the more it hurt.
Right.
And somebody told me, they said do Tai Chi. It's one person said do Tai Chi. It's the only martial art you can do if you're injured. And then somebody else said do Tai Chi. It'll heal your knee. And I found both to be true.
Right. Yeah.
How's your knee now?
It's fine. I don't have any, I have other issues, but my knee healed. So the surgeon had told me that I would probably be a candidate for total knee replacement surgery. By the time I was 50, I'm getting ready to turn 60. So all you wood dragons.
That's right. You're a wood dragon.
Yes. Yeah. I, still have the original knee. So,
Wow.
And it doesn't give me any problem. Obviously it's not the same as the left. But there's no pain or anything like that ever anymore. And it actually healed relatively quickly. Within a year or two, it was healed and strong, and I've never had a problem with it since, so.
I mean, my knee completely healed, and then I was already in love with Chinese martial arts. It's the only reason I didn't go back to karate because I loved karate.
Yeah.
But I did hard style. I did, Shaolin and praying mantis, a lot of kicking and stuff.
Mhm.
And really, you know, if you get a bad knee, go to the doctor. But also, try acupuncture, try, Chinese medicine. There's a lot of options. We are really lucky to have a lot of options.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And yeah, and I mean, I was doing Aikido for many years before that. I injured myself. Um, and the interesting thing is I thought I would go back, to the other stuff. Um, and I probably wouldn't have actually done Tai Chi if it wasn't for the fact that I really couldn't do anything else. And so I went to, you know, I sort of had to do it.
Yep.
Is the way I looked at it is, okay, I'll do this, I'll get my health back, and then I can go back to doing Aikido. Or that's probably where I would have gone back to. And I didn't like it too much at first, Tai Chi. Like I
No.
was I was used to really vigorous, hard,
Yep.
external Western style workouts. If I couldn't at least wring out my underclothes, have my underwear and my undershirt after a workout, I didn't really feel like I had worked out, so weightlifting, years of running, all of that. And I struggled with it at first, and I was just like, well, what am I gonna do? Like, I gotta keep doing this and just see what happens. And you probably don't remember this, but I actually expressed that to you. Because we had talked, and I knew you were a martial arts person, and I think you asked me, how's it going so far, and I was like, well, I like it. I lied a little bit. I like it, but it's not really like I'm used to vigorous workouts. And you said something like you smiled, and then you said something like, I get it. And just give it 6 months.
Yeah.
Give it like 6 months and see how it goes and see how you feel. And then just see how it goes. And yeah, by that time I was pretty much kind of hooked, I would say. I mean, not firmly on the hook, but I was on the hook enough. I made enough progress. I felt enough changes happening in my body that I was at a point where I knew that there was something more to it than what I had experienced previously in any of my kind of training. And so I was curious, and that curiosity, led me to stay with it. And then I would say probably by the time I finished learning the very basics of the long form, I was like, I'm not going back to Aikido. Nothing against Aikido.
Right.
Just that
You want to explore something new?
I wanted to explore something new, and I looked at the, long-term possibilities, I guess, should say. And I've been around Aikido long enough and other martial arts to see that sometimes as the practitioners age, they they may not they may have injuries and stuff that are kind of profound and kind of noticeable. I mean, I used to watch some of the old Aikido masters and stuff, kind of, pretty gimpy, limping around off and on the mat, and like they could do their art on the mat and and be transformed, but they were damaged. And so I sort of looked at it and went, well, my days of thinking about I'm going to be in all kinds of fights and I'm going to need to really defend myself and all that was kind of long. I had grown up, so I was like, yeah, I think I know enough if I need to get into a situation that I can. And so I wasn't thinking about practical stuff, and obviously that comes later in the Tai Chi process. So yeah.
The thing that the only thing I didn't like about Tai Chi when I first joined and started doing it was the idea you had to do it every day. Because from weightlifting and karate, I only went to the dojo,
Yeah.
Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And if I wanted to do a little on my own or do something but it was like, that was cool enough. Like you made
Yeah,
progress, whereas the Tai Chi thing was, you mean I got to practice outside of class and that was like the most important thing.
yeah,
Like class wasn't as important as what are you doing at home? And
right.
and that that's a small thing.
Yeah,
So here's an idea I'd like to flesh out with you is
sure.
what came first in your life? Martial arts training or law enforcement? Or did they come at the same time? Or what's kind of a little timeline?
Yeah, so I started martial arts training in 1979. I was freshman year in high school. Um, let's see, I I'd been an athlete, young early life. My dad was a baseball player, basketball, football, so I played, sports like that. Coming up through my youth. Um, I wasn't a great athlete. I was average probably. I I excelled a little bit in baseball. That was like my dad's game. I was a pretty good third baseman. Um, but I grew up in a kind of a difficult situation. My folks divorced when I was younger. Um, it wasn't the best environment. So I wasn't let's just say I wasn't like developing as would be the ideal for a young person.
Hmm.
My grades sucked. I wasn't applying myself in school. I was mm, I was overweight, poor self-esteem. Didn't think too much of myself really, and got to high school, and like I said, my grades sucked. So baseball wasn't going to be a possibility. I had pretty much given up the other sports by then, and yeah, I was a borderline C/D student, and you don't get to play ball if you're not at least C's. So freshman, I think it was like the second part of the year, a buddy of mine that wasn't an athlete was talking about taking karate lessons or martial arts. And so, I kind of had thought about that a little bit. I was also going through a situation. My mother had kind of hooked up with a guy that wasn't a very nice guy, and so there was. Let's just say it was a difficult environment. He had some addiction problems, and he was kind of a violent person, and so I was living under kind of that. Um, Daily threat of maybe not daily threat of direct violence, but yeah, he was belligerent.
That bullying,
He was a mean person.
yeah.
Yeah, and he threatened my mother. He had been kind of she tried to break it off with him, and he started trying to use her kids against her, like like I'll hurt your kids, that kind of stuff. It wasn't a good situation. So when my buddy started talking about martial arts, I was already kind of thinking, I need to figure something out here because like I may have to like defend myself against the guy. So there was no, well, there were no martial arts schools where I lived. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey called Chatham, and it was 30 minutes from Newark or New York City. And the nearest town that had a martial arts school was Morristown, New Jersey, which was about 20 miles away.
Hmm.
Well, my dad didn't get home from work until late at night. A lot of days, my mother wasn't going to drive me out there. I didn't have my driver's license yet, but thankfully we had the Erie Lackawanna line. There was a train that ran out there. So me and my buddy Joe went out there. We found there was one school there. It was the Taekwondo school.
Taekwondo.
Yeah.
Wow.
Chose Taekwondo. I still remember Master He and Cho. And so we went out there and I had started doing Taekwondo. I'd ride the train usually 3 days a week,
Wow.
after school, get on the train, we'd get a snack, we'd ride, half an hour on the train, about a mile and a half walk up to the dojang, up to the studio. And go up there and we'd work out, take our lesson, and then, ride the train back. And it was good. We did that for about 2 years, I guess. I think I got up to like green belt. I wasn't great with Taekwondo. My body was, not really, it's a lot of high kicks and spinning kicks and all that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't a great fit for me, but it was a good path for me, and it was kind of starting to make me feel a little bit more empowered and all that. So so we did that for 2 years, and then I got my driver's license. My buddy was actually started dating this girl that lived a little bit further west out in a town named Bud Lake. And he had found a school out there that was an American guy that was teaching. He was a Taekwondo guy, but he had kind of an eclectic background. He was doing like traditional Taekwondo forms, but he had been a kickboxer, and so he was teaching some kickboxing, a little bit of eskrima, some salat, and so he was like, "What do you think about going out there if you get bored with this?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go try it."
Yeah.
So we started going out there, and it was a longer drive. That was like a 40-minute drive in the car. So we would drive out there in the evenings, again, probably like 3 times a week. And I did that for about 4 years. And then yeah, see what happened. I have to look at my notes because it's like I've kind of forgotten some of this stuff.
You know, what's funny is that hearing the traveling part is in my career, the schools in St. Paul. St. Paul, if you're not from the Minnesota, the Twin Cities, they're right next to each other. Minneapolis, St. Paul, right next to each other. There may be 15 miles difference, maybe.
Yeah.
And people would go, "Where's your school?" The people from Minneapolis would call.
Yeah.
And they'd be, "Where's your school?" I go, "St. Paul," and they go, "Oh, way over there in St. Paul."
Yeah.
Or vice versa, whatever. And it's like, there were people from here that drove hour and 15 minutes north to study with Master Liang, and here you are, your second school is even farther away.
Right.
Where there's a will, there's a way. And if
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I guess as a kid, I didn't have a lot else going on. Like I said, I wasn't a great student, so I wasn't doing a lot of studying. That wasn't a good thing necessarily, but what else do I got to do? I'm gonna sit and watch TV, or I'm gonna ride the train. So yeah, it was good. It was a good time, good life. Yeah. So then after that my mother moved. She sold our house in Chatham, and we moved out to Middlesex County, which was further away in the other direction. And so going to Bud Lake anymore wasn't really going to work. It was too far by this time. And see, I was out of high school by then. I was going to community college. And so I started looking around Middlesex County, see what's around here that I can go to. And there was a guy named Richard Moravka who was teaching. He was an Ishinru guy. He had trained traditionally in Ishinru, and then he had actually created, in his main school, he taught traditional Ishinru, and then he had this other kind of small school where he taught a non-traditional form of essentially self-defense that he called Tiger. He called it Tiger Karate Society, but it's Tiger Commando Karate. So it was basically what it was Ishinru blocking and striking. And then he had blended it. He was a police officer. He had blended it with some defensive measures stuff that he had learned, and he was a defensive measures guy. And then he had also served in the military in special forces, and so he was pulling stuff from that. And it was really basically, I mean, there were no forms or anything like that. It was basically strike and kick and
a lot of partner work.
All partner work.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
Situational awareness, self-defense scenarios.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
like I mean the dojo was like probably not much wider than this room, it looked, maybe 12, maybe 12 or 14 feet wide where this was taught. And probably the length of this room. There weren't that many people that were interested in it. He mostly taught police officers. And Marafka actually didn't teach. He actually didn't teach anybody except for police officers and like his senior students. I studied with one of his senior students, a guy named Steve Johnson, who was just a powerful guy. Like he had arms on him like this, just huge. He was, I mean, I'm 6'2". I was probably 6'2" back then. He was shorter than me. He was kind of like a fire plug, and he was just a mountain of muscle.
Yeah.
And so he beat the living shit out of me, like constantly. Like it was, I would go to practice, and I would just come home and my arms were all bruised and stuff. And I enjoyed it. Like it was seriously empowering, like, and then, there's all kinds of stuff that was mixed in there. So we would learn how to fight, like you're sitting in a chair and somebody grabs you from behind. You're sitting in a bar and, this happens. And then part of the training was like how to find something close that you can use as a weapon, as an impact weapon or something. So it was really geared towards like
Self-defense.
survival.
Yeah, survival.
This wasn't traditional.
Not like a competition.
No, and I was still kind of, concerned about my situation, even though I was still living at the house and commuting to school. The thing that with my mother's boyfriend was still ever present, and it was like, yeah. So I'm like, yeah, this is of interest to me. Let me see how this is, and so yeah. So I did that for 4 years. Marafka promoted me to black belt in his system, and then I was getting sick of getting my ass beat like that all the time. And working with Steve, like, it was literally, we'd go back and forth, punch, a lot of punching, not a lot of kicking, and just, direct linear blocking.
Oh.
And like, it got to the point where like, I can't hold him off. Like, he's bigger than me, he's stronger than me. And I'm like, this ain't working. Like, you're powering right through my blocks. And it was, well, you got to get to the gym, you got to start lifting weights. And I'm like, I'm never gonna, first off, I'm not that interested in it. I mean, I've lifted weights, I do it, but like, I'm not gonna be a power lifter. I'm not gonna have a body like you. And so, of course, at the time I was like most martial arts people, right? I'm into all the martial arts movies. I watched the Kung Fu movies on Saturday, and at the time Chuck Norris was big. I was a big Chuck Norris fan.
Yep.
I watched all of his movies multiple times. And then this guy, Steven Seagal, happened on the scene.
Yeah.
And I went to see a Steven Seagal movie with my buddy. And of course, again, we didn't have the internet back then. They didn't tell you what he was doing, what the style was. And it was, I mean, his movies, it's really more Aikijitsu. It's not Aikido.
Right.
I mean, he's hurting people. Those are Aikijitsu techniques.
Yes.
But I looked at it and I could see the difference in the combat method. And I was like, he gets out of the way. He doesn't stand in there and take, and so I was interested, and then I left the theater, and I didn't think anything about it. We didn't have Google, I couldn't look it up, didn't know what it was. And by this time I was working for an armored car company in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and it just happened. Like it's weird how fate happens, right? I'm actually delivering a bag of money to a bank one day, and right next door to the bank there was an Aikido dojo, and the only reason I knew that was because there was a poster of a guy in a kama, standing in the window, and I went, I remember that from the movie. So it stuck in my head, and I'm like, okay, it's Aikido. So that's what it is. And so later that week, I think I went back there. After I got off work, I went up and I walked up the steps. It was like on the 3rd floor. It was this big dance, like there was a ballet studio above. And I could hear, people hitting the mats and stuff as I was walking up the steps. And so I went in and sat down and watched, and I was just fascinated by it. I was like, now, I wasn't thinking about, is it practical? At that time in my life, I didn't know what practical necessarily was, but it was beautiful
Mm,
to watch. I was just captivated.
mm,
And so the teacher, came over, Rick Stickles Sensei, who I've been fortunate in my life to have, and there's other teachers that I'll mention. I just happened into like really good teachers.
Mm.
So Stickles Sensei was a senior student of Yamada Sensei in New York.
Mm.
Yamada was one of O Sensei's senior students, and so this guy's good. I started practicing Aikido there. I did that in Elizabeth for a few years, and then I took a job with we'll get into my law enforcement stuff that I'm
Yeah.
gonna roll in next. And I moved to Washington DC, Maryland area. And once I got settled in, got through my training and all that stuff, I immediately went to find an Aikido school, and there was Baltimore Aikikai, which was close, relatively close, 25 minutes from my house, 20 minutes from my house. And then in Washington DC, in northern Washington DC, just outside Washington DC, before you get into the city, Mitsuya Satome Sensei, who was another one of O Sensei's original students.
Wow.
That was his dojo. And so I started going to Baltimore Aikikai, because that was closer to my house. And trained there. They were students of Satome. And so I went there, like 3-4 days a week, continued to practice Aikido. And then when I was working afternoon shift and couldn't go to the dojo there, I would leave a little early for work and go to Satome Sensei's dojo, and got to study with Satome Sensei. And so that was, of course, I mean, at that time, I didn't realize how lucky I was. Like, I didn't get it. I was still.
You're thinking all Aikido schools are like that, or
Yeah.
or all martial arts
Yeah.
get to study with that really
Yeah.
pure lineage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really kind of dense, like
Spoiled, like me. I was spoiled.
I didn't know
Yeah.
what I knew, and it's like, oh, like you're really lucky. Like,
Yeah.
what the chances are that you're gonna have that like that close to you?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I did that the whole time I was in Baltimore, Washington. That was like 7 years there, and Satomi promoted me to Shodan, so
Wow.
that was a big accomplishment for me. And then what happens after that? I go to DEA, so I get hired as a criminal investigator. Relocate, move to Detroit, Michigan. And in Detroit, Michigan, after I get through my DEA training and all that, I get to Detroit and no Aikido dojo. So I was a little sad. There was an Aikido school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, actually another very high level teacher named Ikeda Sensei, but it was too far. Like, and with my schedule, literally with my schedule, being on call all the time and working late, and I wasn't going to be able to get there with any degree of regularity. And so I kind of took a little break from my Aikido practice in the studio. And but it was in me, so I didn't want to give it up. So I built a little mat space in my basement. I figured out like how to, get the materials and constructed basically half of my basement into.
That's how we met.
I made it into a little dojo. Yeah, I mean, I had everything set up, a sensei's picture and, calligraphy and so that was my space. Now I didn't have anybody to practice with. So, and it's just occurring to me right now is that I was doing a form of Tai Chi in my Aikido practice because I was creating my own forms.
Yeah.
And just doing the movements without a partner. And so it's basically, Tai Chi in reverse. Like
Yep.
I learned the Aikido and had been doing it for years. And now I just did it in my basement. Took Ukemi, practiced in my falls and all that stuff that you could do. And then I took up Ashtanga yoga as I was looking for something else to learn and had started to get interested in like healing and wellness. And so I studied Ashtanga yoga for the whole time that I was there. So it was about 7 years. During that time, I became a defensive measures instructor for DEA. I started to get drawn to teaching and was interested in that. And then when was teaching police defensive measures, and one of the I think one of my agents, one of the DEA agents, had asked me about these joint locks that I was showing. And I said, oh, I learned that in Aikido. And he said, oh, can you teach Aikido? Would you teach me Aikido? And I said, well, I never really thought about it, but I suppose I could. And then, so I ended up forming this little kind of informal DEA Detroit Aikido club and borrowed the mats. I borrowed the mats that I had bought from the defensive measures budget to use in defensive measures. And basically, couple 2-3 days a week after work, if we weren't on the street, I'd go down there, and whoever showed up, we'd do Aikido. I had probably 5 or 6 DEA agents that were pretty regularly coming down there, an FBI agent or two, customs agent, a couple of assistant US attorneys. And yeah, so that was fun. I did that. That was really my first, I'd say, experience with teaching martial arts. Came after the defensive measures stuff, and then I don't know. I liked it. I liked teaching defensive measures. I liked working with the guys that way and stuff. And then I thought, well, I'm far from being a master at Aikido. I mean, Shodan is like, you're just getting there.
You get serious now.
But I'm like, I know enough to teach these guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I did that. It was fun.
Yeah, the joint locks must be super practical for law enforcement.
Yeah, they are. But you also learn real quick that it's not quite the way as it goes in dojo. Somebody doesn't want a joint lock put on them.
Yeah. You mean a little resistance, meeting some resistance.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the randori, the free flow idea of being able to, like, you can't decide what you're going to do. It's going to emerge within the. So that was actually interesting because a lot of martial artists don't really get that, necessarily, and so they don't always know that, like. They don't always know that. They don't get that feedback necessarily all the time in their dojo and their training that, these are techniques, but like, you can't decide what you're going to do to somebody, like, because you're going to be responding to what's happening. So you're having to learn, okay, well, you go to put a lock on and it doesn't work. Well, what's the other way to go? Because so then that's Tai Chi, right? That's Aikido. That's like you have to move with what they're doing.
People think I'm being philosophical when I say the opponent tells you how they want to be defeated.
Yeah, no.
It's just a really fancy way of saying you have to take what they're giving you.
Right.
Unless you're like your other sensei, unless you're really big and can enforce your physical will and force it. And that's the interesting thing, like Chinese wrestling or Chin Na is you take the technique that's offered to you.
Yeah.
And of course, it's offering makes it sound so peaceful.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just what's that situation.
Right. And that's also kind of, I think, the piece of the time where I started to realize, like after you do martial arts for a while, you get a little cocky, like you think and so it was a little bit of humility building, because it was like learning that, hey, you know what, like when you're doing this stuff in the studio, you to a certain extent, your partner's cooperating. because you're learning the technique. And in order to learn the technique, that's necessary. But like skill is like the higher part. That's like, can you execute something in a situation that's fluid? So I started to feel like, oh, you kind of suck at this, because it's like, you go to put a lock on, you can't think about like what's coming. You got to be able to feel that. And then, again, so we're not even like to the Tai Chi yet, but that's the piece that was very interesting to me, is the sensitivity piece of, yeah, responding and feeling what's happening. I mean, there's that there in Aikido too, but you don't learn it that way because you're hands-on from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so, so you may not necessarily learn it. You may not necessarily learn it because you try to force your way through everything. You haven't already built that kind of underlying fluidity of like yielding and moving and all of that. Like you're trying to do something to someone before you've really mastered your own body.
The thing that I had to learn was that, like, just say you learn a technique, you learn a wrist lock.
Yeah.
The technique is to teach you how to bend that joint.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not teaching you how to get that wrist lock on somebody. And frankly, it doesn't teach you the real situation where that wrist lock is applied.
Right.
And so that's where a lot of traditional martial arts people, that's where they don't realize that, the real beautiful, perfect technique in training,
Yeah.
that's to learn how that joint, make pain in the joint. It's always going to be sloppy, and it's always going to be messy. And, like, you have to do that part of it too. And, that's the art part.
Yeah.
Where the technique looks perfect and everything works and the person taps out. And it doesn't mean they're not feeling pain. They're feeling pain.
Yeah.
At that part, it's perfect, but the situation to get there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same in pushing hands. I mean, the real pushing hands is kind of sloppy.
Yeah.
It's not pretty looking.
No.
It's sloppy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. I remember that first time I got into an engagement with somebody in a law enforcement situation. And it's kind of funny because it's the typical law enforcement type situation. We went to arrest this guy. He did a rabbit on us. He ran. I probably should say this, but like, you never run. Like, you're gonna feel some pain when we catch you if you run.
Yeah, you just made the officer's adrenaline just kick right in.
But the guy ran, and so a bunch of us took off after him. And he was pretty physically fit guy. Like, he'd been in prison, and prison's a great place. Like, they put him there, they feed him 3 good meals a day, and they let him lift weights, so when they get out, they're harder to count. I never really I get it, like, you gotta give him something to do, but I never really understood that. Like, the guy goes in and he's like 190, he comes out, he's 240, and it's like, okay, go ahead, put handcuffs on this guy. So it ended up like a pile, like he gets tackled, and everybody's, they're trying to like wrench his arm behind him, and a couple of the guys were, guys that are doing like the Aikido classes. I mean, they're trying to put a lock on him, and I'm looking at him, and I'm going, yeah, this is not great. So I'm looking at it going, what do we do here? Like, how am I gonna, yeah? And then I just thought, okay, well, let me try something. And I got in behind him and just took my thumb and like stuck it in behind his ear here. And there's no guarantee that's gonna work.
Yeah.
But it's a pressure point, right? And sure enough, it worked, right?
Yeah.
He let his hands come up and they got him and cuffed him. But in the midst of all that pile, I was like, you know what, this shit all goes right out the window. When it gets right down to it, it's so there's an informative piece there is that I've kind of taken with me, is like, you can practice whatever you want, but the thing that's going to work is going to be whatever is the most direct, quick, fast,
Convenient.
Yeah. Doesn't need to look pretty. In fact, don't worry about what it looks like. Like, so it's really the same thing that I was learning in the, the defensive, the non-traditional issue, hand-to-hand stuff is you're gonna probably get hurt. Like, you're not gonna, even if you don't get hurt, seriously injured, like if you're involved in a kind of engagement like that, like, it's not gonna be clean. So hopefully you don't get hurt, hopefully you get seriously injured, and hopefully you can navigate it and do whatever needs to get done, but yeah, so there's the real world piece of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you know, I've said this to you personally, and I've said it to everybody in my class. The highest level martial arts people on the planet are the police, because there's no referee, there's no weight division, and you don't know who, like the 911 doesn't go, 911, martial arts background of the, suspect. I mean, you have to land,
Yeah,
and you can't just shoot people, contrary to popular belief, you can't just shoot them.
right.
Really, police have to figure a lot of stuff out. My hat goes off to you guys.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, they do. They do. And they're not really well trained for what they need to be able to do either. And the public doesn't always know that. And that can kind of run against them sometimes, because I think there's sometimes a perception that, that they're highly trained in, like, whatever you want to call it, police defensive measures and all that. They get a certain amount of training in that. They get in-service training, but like, to some extent, it's just enough sometimes to get you in trouble.
Well, a piece that, I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up with my parents saying respect the police, and there was this whole thing where the police had psychological self-defense, that when they came in, they had that uniform.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then there was the respect thing.
Yeah.
Now, guaranteed, yeah, Bonnie and Clyde probably didn't respect the police, blah, blah, blah. But like there was that whole thing. And, we know now, especially us living in Minneapolis, I mean, the opinion of the police, the badge does nothing. There's no, so, if you get technique, you gotta have technique.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
you get away with very little. Although, we still slow down when we see a state trooper when we're speeding on the highway.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah.
face to face, sometimes it's not, the uniform doesn't have that power.
Well, and that's to the law-abiding citizen, and that's not necessarily the case to people that are used to being around the receiving end of going to jail.
Yeah.
And all that, like, they're not afraid of the police. They're not, in that way. And so all of that, body language, presence, that doesn't always work with hardened people.
Right.
They're not, it doesn't work, it doesn't phase them, which is, why the don't ever pull your gun on somebody. I mean, part of their training is like, don't threaten somebody with a firearm. Like, don't, if you don't have justification to actually use force, or you're not in a situation where it's potentially that kind of situation, don't think you're gonna intimidate somebody with a firearm, because some of these hardened
Have had firearms
individuals
pointed at them.
have numerous times and been shot,
Yeah,
and it may not go the way you think it goes, and now you're in a situation where maybe you got an unarmed person and you end up shooting them. So, yeah, that's a tangent, but yeah.
yeah. No, and well, it's the martial part of martial art. It's the real practical stuff.
Right.
And then all levels, what is it? The different levels of force, and
Yeah, which, that's much more of a scrutiny and limitation for law enforcement, I guess you could say, is, like, they have to meet certain standard of belief that they're, and I think a lot of places have done away with, like, the pyramid of, like,
yeah,
force and all that now, and it's because it's more fluid. But yeah, as a civilian, we have a little bit, it's not quite the same. I mean, if you believe that you're reasonably in jeopardy, you can defend yourself using, but again, you're gonna be held to the reasonable man standard. Would a reasonable person in your position have done this?
yes,
Was that the reasonable thing to do? And I've never met this reasonable man, but sometimes, depending on where you are, what the law thinks is reasonable might not be what it is somewhere else. If there's states where someone breaks in the front door of your house, the reasonable expectation is that you try to escape,
Yeah.
get out the back door.
Yeah.
In other states, it's perfectly reasonable for you to defend yourself and
Yeah.
to hold your ground.
Yep.
And so, reasonable is different depending on which jurisdiction you're in.
Yeah, and I bet also rural versus urban, and
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
So after your Aikido, after Detroit, is that when you came to Minnesota?
Yeah, so I came to Minnesota in, let's see, 2002, so September 11th happened. I was at DEA Detroit when that happened. And then after 9/11, the government stood up the Federal Air Marshal Service. I was uh, I was kind of I was kind of burned out on doing drug enforcement work. I never really loved it. I didn't really have, this may come up in our conversation, like the law enforcement thing. It's something that I happened into and I think had to do with my life, my early life, and you know, the protector thing. I'm not sure that that path would have come out for me. I don't think maybe I wouldn't have gone that way. But law enforcement, I got to let's see, the end of the end of 2001, I was starting to kind of look for something else to do. My time as the defensive training instructor was kind of coming to a close. I was, I was spending half of my time doing agent training, and the other half I was, making cases, or supposed to be making cases. And I wasn't a great case agent. I'll say that. I wasn't great at going out there and drumming up drug cases. Um, I was much better in a support role as an investigator. Takes a certain kind of person to really be able to go out there and get it, and I didn't have the heart for it. So some of my evaluations weren't as good as they could have been, and 9/11 happened. The Federal Air Marshal Service was stood up, and people from various different agencies started being recruited, leaving whatever to staff up the Air Marshal Service. My first boss at DEA, who we had a really good relationship, he left DEA and took a supervisory position with the Air Marshal Service, and called me, and because he knew I was kind of ready to be done with drug enforcement, and said, I can probably get you over here if you want to come over, and probably get you can probably get a supervisor job. So that kind of transpired for me. I was hired by the Federal Air Marshal Service to head up the training and operations section for the office up here, and I came up to Minnesota to be the training instructor, lead training instructor and supervisor of the training.
Was that at MSP? Is that where you trained, or?
Yeah, well, we had an office in Edina.
Edina.
Yeah, and so I stepped into that role, and then so I was primarily oversight of the training department. Two Federal Air Marshal training instructors and myself were doing all of the training initially, and then down the road, the staff grew, and we had more. I had a staff of trainers underneath me that were doing all of the teaching. And
so what you're training officers who are going to fly on flights, like undercover officers, or what is it, like hijacking prevention?
So Federal Air Marshals were, obviously the idea there was to get aviation back in service. The purpose was to be there to defeat a terrorist attack.
To prevent another 9/11 from happening.
To the extent that you could. I mean, I mean, that's what it was created for. The reality of it is, it was really more to save the aviation industry, to get people flying again, because they were afraid that the fear
Yeah,
people might not fly, and that would have had a devastating impact in terms of the reality of being able to do, I mean, I can't disclose like how many air marshals there are.
yeah,
But I'll just say this, it's nowhere near like what you would need to cover like all of the potential, you know.
there's not one on every
And that,
plane.
and so
yeah.
that wasn't the intent of it.
Yeah.
It was like, using intelligence to target what flights could be high threat. And so in the same way, cops can't be everywhere.
Right, exactly.
So the idea was to provide a protective layer of security to make it harder. And then hopefully, yeah, for them to be in the right place at the right time if there was another terrorist attack. So, yeah, so the training of that was, and it was centralized like all police training is. Air marshals all went to the training facility in Atlantic City, New Jersey for primary training, and then out to the field office, and then the field offices handled all the in-service stuff, which for air marshals was much higher based on because of the mission that they had. So they were in training constantly. If they weren't flying, they were training. Yeah.
So like you have to train, you have to be able to like, just say for instance, put handcuffs on somebody in an airplane.
Yeah.
In seats. I mean, like talk about resisting and
Yeah.
So did you train in like a fuselage type dojo, or what was that?
Yep, so every air marshal field office had a mock-up of inside of an airplane. Ours in Minneapolis was not so fancy, but it was basically looked like the inside of a airplane. It was, a cylinder.
So doing wrist locks a little different than out on the nice tatami dojo kung fu school floor, huh?
Yeah, well, where you have where you have all kinds of room, it's not so hard. You definitely have to dial things down and make it much smaller. The aisle of an aircraft is not very big. You don't have room to, you don't have room to maneuver. You don't have room to, you don't have
no sidestepping.
No sidestepping. There's no room to get offline of an attack.
Yeah, you're going to be face to face.
You're going to be in it. And then having to put handcuffs. Well, and you got a seat here. You got a seat right here. You got passengers all over the place. You're not going to put them. Yeah, so you have to. So there's definitely was a piece to learning. Could because they were trained initially with regular law enforcement and police defensive measures tactics in the mat room.
Lots of room.
Putting people down, proning them out, handcuffing them, and then you get to the field. I mean, they were also learning like how to manage people in seats, but the reality is that had to get dialed in. And so it took a lot of, and to a certain extent, the trainers in the field offices were starting to adapt the program as it went on. And so they were
doing a lot of training in a fuselage to be able to work that program, to be able to teach other officers.
Right. Well, yes, this is how they taught you to put handcuffs on in the mat room. Okay, let's see how we're gonna do that they were teaching techniques to do it in the seats and stuff too, but again, joint locks, and you got uncooperative passengers that want to give you his hand.
No, they get a lot of leverage to resist you.
Yeah. And then your maneuverability, I mean, just to get up out of the seat, so it's a very difficult environment to operate in.
Did you do firearms training in a fuselage?
We didn't do live fire in a fuselage in the field offices. We did have live fire shoot house in Atlantic City, so we did do live fire. It was a mock-up though. It wasn't an actual airplane. It was a mock-up of an airplane. So, the seats and all that, to learn how to get out of the seat, because that's, people take that for granted.
I mean, think how hard it is when it's to get out of your seat just when the plane is landed.
The original air marshals that were before the Federal Air Marshal Service was stood up, and some people don't know this, the Federal Aviation Administration had air marshals for many, many years. I think after the Lockerbie incident,
Oh, yeah.
there was a small contingent of federal air marshals that were under the Federal Aviation Administration. It was like 20 or 30, I mean, small, and they just flew international flights, all kind of former special forces operatives. And they had very strict things. And one of the things they had to be able to do is they had to be able to stand up out of an aircraft seat without using their hands at all. Like they had to be able to come straight up and be engaging their weapon at the same time. That's not easy. Like physically, like
No.
even if you're fit, like to be able
Plus,
to,
if you're a tall guy and you got the luggage thing right up there, and oh my gosh.
so that kind of went out the window, like when you try to hire thousands of people, like to meet a standard that's like a special forces person, you're not gonna be able to get there, so things, changed, and it was elevated as much as they could make it, but I'll just say it's a hard environment to operate in, even if you're really good.
Well, and if you did have to use your firearm, you are in such a small area with so many innocent bystanders. I mean,
Right.
I can't think of, like shooting in a crowd in a very small space.
Yeah, there's not a lot of forgiving things if you miss.
So did you guys do a lot of firearms training?
Yeah.
Just
Well, I
efficiency?
don't know if it's this way anymore, but in the beginning, they had the most amount of firearms training of any federal agency. I mean, they were on the range every week in the beginning. I'm sure that's not that anymore, but or may not be that anymore, but yeah, you can't miss. I mean, if you miss, like you're either gonna punch a hole in the skin of the aircraft, which isn't great. Yeah, or you're gonna shoot another person, like an innocent person that you're trying to protect.
It's like all hostage shots.
Yes, so like you can't miss. So yes, that was another kind of critical piece. They had to be really good shots. Really
Okay,
good.
so if you shoot a hole in the side of the airplane, are people going to get sucked up?
No, not like you would see in a movie. It'll
No.
depressurize the airplane. It would.
That's what it does?
It'll, sure, because you're not gonna get probably explosive decompression where like the whole side of the airplane is gonna blow out
Okay.
from a bullet hole, but you're gonna get, yeah, I mean, if you're above where there's oxygen, it's gonna be a problem, so. Not huge, not right away, but,
But it's not enough a problem to deter you from if you had to shoot somebody that high up there.
oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
You shoot them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. They were, and yeah, and they were mostly in the beginning, a lot of like. And that's a whole separate story. It was funny because they brought together. The initial training people they brought together were all like. Former Army Rangers, SEALs, Delta, like to train these people up. And their mindset is not the same as law enforcement. And so there was a law enforcement mission. And then they brought in Secret Service guys, FBI, DEA, and other agencies. And a lot of those people were like management. So the agency was headed up by management that was mostly law enforcement. And the operatives, the people that were teaching the skills were like military guys. And so there was a little disconnect there. And it was funny a little bit, but not so much, like, because we can't kill everybody. Like, yeah. So military mission is a little different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so I ended up there and I came back up, came to Minnesota, got settled in and then got back to Aikido training and was I don't remember if it was called Twin Cities, but I think it was Twin Cities Aikido or Twin Cities Aikikai. It's since closed, changed. It was literally like right around the corner from the.
Yeah, they moved. They were over by Hampton go up.
Yeah, it literally was like, you could probably throw a rock from there. if
Oh,
you had a
yeah.
Good arm and hit the.
We would get people come in and they would say, we're looking for Twin Cities Aikido. We'd be down the street.
Yeah.
And they'd send people who were looking for Twin Cities Tai Chi up the street, it's all
Yeah,
very, very friendly and cordial. And,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, but yeah, at that time, Tai Chi wasn't yet a thought in my mind, and that came, later, so. Yeah.
okay, so I'm gonna